Hi, and welcome back. Barbara and I are very pleased to have with us today Dr. Melanie Amann, the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Der Spiegel, a weekly magazine published in Germany that is one of Europe's biggest and most prestigious news outlets. Der Spiegel is famous for its large and rigorous fact-checking department, which makes Dr. Amann the perfect person to add some real-world perspective to the fact-checking lessons we've already heard from Barbara. Welcome, Dr. Amann. Very glad to have you with us, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So I'm wondering a little bit about the tradition and the philosophy. I mean, because the fact-checking has been an important part of Spiegel for decades, if not from the beginning.
Indeed, I think in the almost 77-year history of our magazine, we were in fact the first publication in Germany to introduce a systematic fact-checking of the stories that we published. And Spiegel has been famous for really thoroughly checking every story that was published in the magazine. And I think we were also the first to have a whole department devoted to this kind of work. But since then, for a few decades, to be fair, we've lost that status of being the only ones to do that. In fact, other magazines and publications have also boosted their departments or created own departments in this area. So I think in general in Germany, the system of fact-checking has vastly improved in the media over the last, let's say, 20 years.
I mean, it obviously has journalistic benefits. Does the magazine also see it as part of its business model? Because frankly, the trend in the rest of the world, or most of the rest of the world, has been in the other direction, and for business reasons. It's seen as a luxury that can't be afforded.
Well, we have used it in our marketing campaigns in the past, but it hasn't been like a systematic business strategy, even though we used to have the slogan Spiegelleser wissen mehr, that can be translated as Spiegel subscribers have understand the world better or know more about it. So that has the message, like you read us and you know for sure, like the information you get, you can rely on it. And I mean, we will probably get to it later, but our fact-checking department had a slight, let's say, image problem when it turned out that one of our reporters had made up most of his stories, or has used a lot of made-up facts, made-up infos for his reports, mainly on international news. So we also had to change the way our fact-checkers work, or check what the fact-checkers do. So this got us to change our whole approach again, or make it better, improve it.
We'll get into more detail, but how would you summarize the approach and how it works?
Well, I think one very important thing is who checks what, because we used to have this system the team that this reporter was working on had only one or two fact checkers that were always working with them. So this became like an inbreeding situation where people, you get so close to your counterpart that you can't really control him anymore. It's like it's your spouse, it's not your colleague anymore. And you tend to, because you like the person, you're used to working with him or her all the time, that you tend to overlook things because you just have a profound trust in what the other person's doing. And I think the main issue would be to support skepticism, to allow criticism, and to regularly switch people around to know that it's an actual checking process and not just a friendly support or maybe a service to the author, but it's actually a service to the reader and to authenticity and to be faithful to facts and the truth. So that we made sure that you can't have pals working together, but colleagues who respect but also criticize each other.
Yeah, it's like Barbara's talked about, when we look at data, we have to interrogate it, we have to challenge it, and just as a reporter might be challenging a mayor or a senator, the editor, I mean, we all know that a good edit can be very uncomfortable, but you're glad after it's done that someone challenges assumptions, steps back and takes an objective look. It's interesting to see it sort of institutionalized discomfort like that.
Right, that's a good word for it, yeah.
And so what would be, if an ordinary news story lands, and what are the basic fact-checking steps?
Our fact-checking department sends people into each team in their news meetings, so they know what kind of stories are in the pipeline, so to say, and they also obviously have access to our internal planning tool, so they know which story is coming. And then within the fact-checking teams, they are also divided by according to the teams we have in our editorial system. Like we have a team covering German politics, we have a team covering foreign policy, cultural affairs and sports, economics, you name it, like every regular news organization. And so the structure of the fact-checking department mirrors this structure. And so they will then assign people to the topic. And we do have specialists for all kinds of topics. Like they recently hired, for example, a specialist for legal topics, which I used to cover. So they will hire specialists on religious affairs, Islam, or on history or economic policy. So they assign these topics as good as they can to the person who's the biggest expert in it. And well, then there's this process. Either they already come on during the research process and are being asked to provide like dossiers saying, for example, like I'm writing a profile about this politician, and could you send me some stuff that's already been written about them? Or maybe I'm interviewing an artist. Do we have anything on file, like on its earlier works? And so
it works as a research department as well as a fact-checking. It's
yes,
beginning, middle, and end.
And yeah, and in fact, that is a development that is a point of discussion within the company, because the fact checkers say, look, we're fact checkers, we're not really an encyclopedia, and we've been trying to support reporters and in their knowledge in using our archives themselves, and we encourage them to do the research themselves. So this is the let's say the preliminary part. Once the story is written, filed, and edited, it will be promoted to a new status in our system, which we call the flag status. I mean, it's just jargon, like the Amann status, which is like the next level, so to say. And then it's automatically delivered to the person fact-checking it. And this fact-checking process is actually, it looks a bit funny when you see it the first time. The person will usually print out the story and cross out every word that's been checked. I don't know if you do it the same way in the US, but maybe this sounds so special to me, but it's totally normal around the world.
It is.
Cross everything out.
It's the best way.
And then usually there's a phone call, which can be lengthy or short, where people discuss the content of the stories and the stuff that hasn't been clarified yet. And we have, you mentioned at the beginning that we're one of the biggest news magazine in Germany, but I mean, obviously we also have a huge digital publication. So the question is, how do we manage to stay on top of fact-checking everything that we publish? Traditionally, since we come from a print background, we fact-check every story that goes into the magazine. But we don't fact-check every story that goes on the website, because sometimes there's simply no time to do that, which has led to an unhealthy hierarchy of quality management, so to say, like depending on whether the story is first published digitally or in print, which of course is an absurd
It
way
doesn't
to
matter to the
differentiate.
reader, but
Yeah, it's either a story that needs to be checked, or it's a story that doesn't, or is not as high maintenance as one could say. So this is we're still in a phase where we're transitioning into hopefully the ideal system, how to pick the story that should be checked. And we're still developing the criteria according to which the digital stories should be published. And this also varies from one team to the next. I mean, our national politics team, for example, has established this system where they usually the heads of the team will talk to the heads of their fact-checking team leader, will talk to their fact-checking team leader, and they will discuss which stories are planned for the day and for which stories there will be in the foreseeable future the time to check them, and which stories will come late and have to go out fast and will go without checking. So this is, but it might vary in another, like in the cultural team, you might have a totally different system. And there's one big exception, interviews, like what people say in interviews is not being checked as thoroughly as the stories that we do, because we say simply with the amount of stories that we put out, it's impossible to check if like for example, our transport minister says like, I'm proud to say that the German Autobahn system has been enlarged by a factor X or by this or that. And they try to, our fact checkers, if they have the time, they try to check it, but sometimes it's only possible to check our questions, like the Spiegel contribution to this conversation, and not every claim a politician might make, because it's simply not doable, and it's also less our responsibility than it's theirs. And since the German system is also that we send out an interview before we publish it, you don't have that in the Anglo system. We envy you for that. But we usually send the interview for the person to check his or her quotes to see if they've been accurately quoted, and then we publish it. So that's also an opportunity for the teams of, let's say, leading politicians to see, my boss just said it cannot be exactly accurate, so we'll come with the correct number.
There are these two meanings of fact-checking. One is for a publication to be checking the facts that it is producing, and then more recently, maybe it's just in the US, this idea of we're fact-checking politicians and fact-checking what people say, as opposed to when a politician says it, we just transmit it. And it's all over the map here, and it sounds like it. And then it gets messy with the overlap into, are you giving people pre-approval? Or, so what are the expectations for each reporter as to what kind of fact-checking they're expected to do, or who has the ultimate responsibility for the facts in a story?
Well, we tell every reporter that he or she has the final responsibility to get their facts straight. And I mean, this has always officially been the case for Spiegel, but we used to have times when our reporters filed stories and they just left out numbers or facts and saying like X, Y, and they were expecting the fact checkers to put in the right number. For example, saying the Christian Democrats had, like Angela Merkel's party used to do very badly in East Germany with only XY% in regional elections recently. And then they expected the fact checkers to put in the number. So we got a bit lazy. I'm saying we because all of us, to be fair. But we strongly discourage this these days because our people simply don't have the capacity to work as a service unit for the reporter. So if they're expected to, if they want to include this kind of fact, they're expected to gather it themselves. But they can also rely on the fact checkers checking if the number is correct. So it's a give and take. Sometimes people still do this, but in general, it's our reporters' responsibility. The problem is that we do many stories, especially the lengthier ones and the cover stories, where a lot of people contribute. So the fact checkers will write a message usually when the story comes saying like, could you guys please tell me who did which part? And could you please file your, like the basis of your file, your sources? So in our, I should have maybe said this before, in our, like the software that we write our stories in, we can add source material and like attach it, like an attachment to an email. We can attach it to the file,
Great.
and we can like mark it as if we marked it with a text marker, and then so the fact checkers find. In fact, we do a pre-fact checking through the reporters. Ideally, like they get an annotated manuscript, and so reporters are asked to divulge their sources, or they like if they quote certain data that they're using, or they cite a study that their research is based on, or they quote a professor, then they might link the website of his or her university and so on. So some people do it very nicely, some people do it very sloppily. I mean, we all know how it works, and but I think this has made the fact-checking process easier, but of course, at the same time, can you really rely on the sources that the people have used? I mean, isn't it also the job of the fact-checker to check the sources that the reporters have provided? So it might also create new conflict, like, is this a reliable source? For example, when I covered the right-wing party AfD, who's now very successful in Germany, it's like our MAGA movement. At the beginning, I often quoted this polling company that was always giving them very high results for East Germany. And our fact checker said, like, we're not working with this company. We don't find them reliable. And I said, well, so far they've often been very accurate. So there was always a fight when I was using this company as a source. So there might be disagreement, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't make it easier to.
But at least you knew that and you could be transparent about it. So that's
exactly great. Right. Yeah.
So if, I mean, you know, the people that we're targeting for these trainings and discussions are going to have to be those reporters that challenge themselves, right? Which you talked about earlier. What do you arm your reporters with? Do the fact checkers give them training? Yeah, if you could give us some information about that, that would be wonderful.
Well, usually when somebody comes on board at Spiegel, we have these, what we call starter weeks. Like we will, obviously it's like this onboarding process where they're introduced to the way the fact checkers work. And so there will be, I think, at least one day when they're being walked through that department, introduced to their team, and especially how they work and how to do the annotation for stories, and what kind of sources to rely on, how to work with our archive, how to find material for your stories, how to do your own research. But I believe so far that is it. So we expect them to, once they've undergone this kind of training, that from now on they fend for themselves. So we do, usually the fact checkers, when somebody is new to the company, they will look at his or her stories more closely the first weeks, maybe a little longer, to get an idea of how this person works. This is a very unpleasant process for the person in question. I remember it for myself. And since I'm very, how do you say, outspoken, or I don't mind a little fight. So I remember having very heated debates with the fact checkers at the beginning, or proving to be quite stubborn. But I think basically in the end, it was a good way of stubbornness, because they saw that I was serious with my sourcing and my methods, but it took me a while to get used to people like really checking my work the way they did and questioning me the way they did. So still the ideal that newcomers go through kind of a fact-checking boot camp without being explicitly told So, but I mean, ideally, they don't notice it. But I mean, of course, you notice when somebody's monitoring your work very closely. And there's also usually a talk between the fact checkers and the team leaders of where the new reporters are working, like how is the person fending, how is it working, and maybe we should have another conversation about how to work together.
So it's like lessons for reporters is don't take things personally, but stand up for your work, but also be open to the idea that maybe something isn't as good as it could be. So that's a very delicate balance, as you say, Inken.
Yeah, and I think at one point everybody who's new to Spiegel realizes that these are people who can save your reputation and who can save your career.
Over and over
You may
again.
hate them silently or inwardly. You grow to appreciate them. It's like having a lawyer stand next to you. And you also, I mean, I'm speaking from my personal experience. You start, once you've gotten used to working with them, you start incorporating or anticipating what they might ask and already write it in a way that might anticipate what they would have asked about it.
That's great. Yeah.
So for people who don't work in an organization with a department, maybe they can find a colleague, they can fact check each other just to get sort of into the habit and rhythm and ways of thinking about it. So you cover the whole world and you cover lots of different subjects. Are the issues with fact-checking different in different parts of the globe between, say, we think of the US and Europe as sort of being data and information-rich environments, and that's not as true other places. Does that complicate how you deal with fact-checking?
I feel that since we have the internet, theoretically, it shouldn't be a problem. I mean, it's always like the trouble arises, and that was the problem with this one reporter I mentioned earlier who had faked his stories. It's always when you rely on something that only one person has witnessed, and you don't have footage that proves it. Like you have somebody who witnessed, I don't know, a truck of refugees going somewhere, and then he talked to this one person who told him or her XYZ, and then how do you check that? Like the fact checker has no opportunity to speak to a Syrian refugee caught on a Greek island trying to make it to Europe. And like this is actually a true story, unfortunately. We had the situation that a group of refugees who were trapped on an island between Greece and Turkey, a very small island on a river between these two countries. And they claim that they had a little girl with them who had died of a scorpion bite and who could have been saved if they hadn't been trapped on that island, and neither the Turks nor the Greek wanted them. So they were like in no man's land. And so this group actually was stuck on that island, although it later turned out it wasn't really sure, like, were they on this island or were they maybe a few hundred meters upstream on a different island, which was obviously in Turkish or Greek waters. So it was very difficult to say. And then it turned out that this girl never existed. So we did a story saying like, oh my God, it's a huge scandal outside of the European Union, like on the borders of the European Union, people are dying because we're not letting them in. And like the story was written with this righteous anger about how our humanitarian standards are worth nothing. And so somehow neither the fact-checking department nor the reporters were able to get the story straight. It made us look very bad. And so...
Yeah, we talk, when I teach my students, we talk about beware of the single source story and how hard it is when you're dealing with groups who you don't want to re-traumatize, but you still have to fact check somehow. And then, you know, the strategies that you could use to do that. So, and you can always blame your editor too. I tell them that. Yeah. But,
and maybe don't be an activist, it's like, you feel sorry for these people and but maybe you should still check, do they tell you the truth, or are they so desperate that they will tell you anything to make a living.
Right. And people can tell you anything. That's the whole thing. And you can, ask family members, ask them to help you verify it. Who did they go to? Who else knows? Do they, any sort of information that they could give you to corroborate, because you have to. Otherwise, you can't use it.
Yeah.
So, and you had talked about lessons from the issues you had with that one reporter, but that maybe might apply more generally to whether it's a reporter trying to put something over or someone in the field, story subject. So you talked about trying to create a little more distance, not having that sort of personal chumminess from continued pairing up of people. Are there any other changes that you made or are still contemplating and making to try and deal with some of these gaps and vulnerabilities?
We encourage people to document their research even more thoroughly than before. For example, we ask them to submit photos of protagonists that they've talked to, maybe even submit a recording of a background talk they had with people. But I mean, then again, of course, you cannot. Usually, they don't submit talks with politicians. Like, it's more talking to people maybe who speak in another language, and like, did you get the translation right? You had an interpreter. Have you always worked with that person, or is it the first time you worked with him or her? Maybe it's better to have the recording checked by somebody. For example, we had a fact checker in that case of this little girl on the island who is a Greek-born fact checker who happened to be Greek, so he could access Greek coverage for the topic and also eyewitness reports in other media, and so that was a great help. But this was a total coincidence. We had this person. We might not have somebody who speaks like Portuguese or something else. So we always encourage people, like, do you know how you work with? But our foreign desk is usually very reliant on this. So we haven't really. I mean, those are the two cases. This reporter who really actively misled us and faked his stories. That's one thing, and the other thing with the little girl is a case where activism got people to take things too far, or goodwill turned to something bad. So these are the constellations usually where you have to talk to people. And this is more of a general, the second case is more of a general attitude towards your work. Like, this is something we have to discuss regularly. This is less a question of fact checking, but it's more a very founding principle, like, how do you cover events at all? Like, do you want to do good, or do you want to report accurately? And so we try to instill the idea of, like, our founder coined this phrase, sagen was ist, just say things the way they are, or describe things the way they are. Don't embellish it, don't make anything up, like, be very crisp and concise and just no nonsense, so to say. And this is the message we try to get people to follow. And then usually the fact checking will be easier, because if you try to really just describe what's before your eyes and, like, show, don't tell, and let people make up their own mind, and don't try to, like, create a feeling of anger in your reader about something, or don't try to instill a certain opinion in them unless you're writing an opinion piece. And I think usually this should also influence the fact checking in a positive way, or make it easier.
Yeah, that instilling skepticism without it being dismissive. There's a joke, Barbara, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but the old timers would say, if your mother says she loves you, check it out.
Oh, yes.
Get a source.
That's evergreen.
But speaking of sources of misinformation and potentially of good information, are you guys experimenting at all with artificial intelligence, or do you have a view about how that can and can't and might work in this process?
Yeah. We have a task force who's working on a way for an AI chatbot to do a first fact checking, like of a story before the actual fact checking person gets to it. And they're working on this basic prompt to, like the mother of all prompts, to I think they're in the 14th version of that now, like where you tell the AI, check this story. And it's fascinating to read this prompt because it goes like, okay, sit down. It's as if you're talking to a real person, because apparently that's, for the AI, it works better if you treat it as if it were a human. Scary, but it's like you tell, sit down, relax, read this text thoroughly, and then check all the facts, including this and that, and using these sources. And so this prompt has been worked on many, many, many times, and it's quite long. And so the idea is to have like a preliminary check, so that, for example, dates, names, spelling, grammar should all be like done by AI, and that then I don't know how to differentiate that, but then the real story or the real report, the difficult stuff, can still be checked by a human being, or can be rechecked. I mean, it's also being checked by the AI, but it's being, then the in-depth fact-checking can be done by a person. And we would definitely never, I don't think we will reach a point where we, like, no human eyes check out a text before it's put out. I think we will never leave the fact-checking up to AI completely. I'm saying never. I say never.
Well,
But
how
our current
accurate?
attitude is like, no text leaves Spiegel without humans having written it, edited it, or contributed to it, checked it.
How accurate or inaccurate do you find the AI to be so far?
It's quite good, apparently. I mean, I don't have it's 6 weeks ago that I last talked to the person who's in charge of this, so there might already be a new development, but he was very excited. He was talking about a story about from our science team. It was about birds, and some kind of bird that they got. I think the question was, does it roost? I don't know, in May or in April or something, and the AI knew exactly what was right or wrong about it. So the level was quite astonishing to what they could already check, and they would use, like, the AI that we use is based on our archive, so they could access any story or any report in our archive. They don't Google, so to say, or it doesn't Google it. It goes. It uses
It's got a
our
corpus that you can trust.
Yeah.
That's great. And just to wrap things up, I know you've got a busy day or evening. So if you're speaking to a young reporter who, like most of the students in this class, does not work for a large organization, let alone one with a large fact-checking team, which is very rare anywhere these days, and they're sort of sending them out in the wild and saying, here's the thing you need to know about getting your stuff right and fact-checking what you've encountered, what would your sort of North Star guidance be for them?
It's a tough question. I think I would, speaking for myself and my work, I've always tried to like be as precise as if nobody else were going to check it, and be as careful and meticulous as if you were the last person to do the math, so to say, or to do the checks. And if you're not sure, I mean, I don't know how it works in the US, but we often encourage, for legal reasons, we encourage our young reporters, like, not to do like, this happened that way, but to be like, this apparently happened that way. Like, add these little words that may soften the blow, or may make the story a bit more boring. Yeah. And often get attacked by right-wingers saying, yeah, so you're writing that it's apparently like this, but like, to show, like, have the courage to be careful. Like, it doesn't I say it doesn't lessen the quality of a story if you're modest, if you're not boastful about your scoop, but if you're cautious in your approach.
I'm going to get a T-shirt with that printed on it. Have the courage to be careful. That's great.
You make it sound so good.
You did.
The humility of knowing, having learned the hard way, how easy it is to be wrong. But it also sounds like, from your description of the workflow there, that I think that for anybody, even if you don't have the software that puts in the links and the citations, that sort of transparency, even if it's only to yourself, of being clear, I'm making this assertion and this is where it's coming from. I'm drawing on this study and here's where it is. If people were to sort of think of, like, how do I prepare this for a fact checker, even if there is no fact checker, they can make use of the processes you've developed.
Yeah, I guess. True. And I mean, it's also about what we try to tell our sort of, say, middle management, the team leaders, is that they will always defend the story to the outside world as much as possible, but still, like, inside, we have to be honest with each other, and we have to take responsibility. Like, you have to, both as a reporter, take responsibility, even if the part of the story where a flaw was maybe is not yours, but you're the lead author. You might still be called to question, like, why did you publish this, or why did you file the story this way, or didn't you, like, somebody contributed a part to the story that's not accurate, but you also didn't question it. So you're also, like, the first reader, like the person who puts the story together from the contributions of maybe 5 different reporters, has the same responsibility as a team leader might have. And then the team leader still also has the responsibility, even though it's not his or her own research, because there might be a tendency that the team leaders say, okay, I don't know, I've just relied, there's such good reporters, and I just relied on the quality of their work, and say, yeah, but it's your work to question what they file, even if they're great guys and you like going for a beer with them, and you don't want to, like, it's the guy who always gets the scoop on everything in the military, but he may still have screwed up in this certain case. So stay on your toes. Don't get lazy with people you trust, because you could always trust them. They might still be a point where they mess up because maybe you've put too much on their plate, or maybe they got cocky because they were always right about everything and the source was always reliable, and all of a sudden it wasn't. I mean, look at that poor Bloomberg reporter who for some reason broke the story about the hostage exchange early, and she probably got all her facts straight, but for some reason she still encouraged your company to send the story out too early, and it may have jeopardized the whole operation. So is it like, this is something, like, you, even if there are people you work with continuously, and it doesn't mean there's no judgment in character about somebody if you still assess their work thoroughly, and you have to treat them like you meet them for the first time, and still have the benefit of a doubt, even though they deliver great work, because that's your job, and you're also protecting them in that way. You try to establish this idea that fact-checking is something that protects you. It annoys you, but it will save you and help you. And so the fact-checker is not the enemy.
You're representing the reader, but you're also protecting the writer.
Yeah.
So, and if you have the courage to be careful, you also have the courage to be a pain in the ass. So, and then go get a beer.
Exactly. And then you can celebrate if you had a great publication and it worked fine.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot more fun than the other kind of beer.
And we can all sleep at night.
Crying in your beer.
Crying in your beer. So,
yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And
Thank you. It was interesting for me too. It was stimulating to reflect on all this. Thank you.
I bet.
We all do things and then don't think about them too much unless we have to. So
Something to be proud of.
Yes, you're building reputation day by day. So
Right.
okay, thanks again.